Hey everyone, my name is Jeremy Canton, and in this video we're going to talk about how to use the ultimate 3D model pack for Clip Studio Paint presented by Graphicsly. This is a collection of 3D assets that you can use to quickly create environments, block out a scene, or depict complex objects that are often very challenging and time-consuming to draw by hand. I'm going to show you everything you need to know about how to import, manipulate, and stylize the 3D assets so that they blend seamlessly with your 2D elements. I'm also going to show you some personal tips and tricks to speed up your process and some workflows to get the most out of using the 3D model pack. So let's get started. So first off, go to graphicsly.com and then go to Add-ons, 3D Model Pack. Here you can purchase the Ultimate 3D Model Pack and then download the zip folder that comes with it. Once you've downloaded the zip file onto your hard drive, we need to unload the contents. In this case, I'm on Windows and I'm going to right click and go to Extract All. I'm going to extract everything right onto my desktop. And if you're on a Mac, simply double click the zip folder to unpack it. Let's take a look at the contents of the zip file. So inside you'll see a 3D Assets folder, an FBX folder, an All Assets preview image. So this covers a little sample of what everything looks like inside. And then an instructions text file in case you need some help step by step about how to import into Clip Studio Paint. Let's take a look at the 3D Assets folder. Inside, you'll see a folder for each asset inside the model pack. And inside each of those folders, you'll find a .clip file, an FBX file, and a JPEG file. The JPEG file is just a preview of what the asset looks like, so that you don't have to open the 3D file itself. The clip file is just a working Clip Studio Paint document with the 3D model already inside the layers for you. And lastly, there's the .fbx file, which is the raw 3D file. If we step back a bit and we go to the FBX folder within the main root, you'll find all of the 3D assets in their FBX file format. And this is useful just because it's a nice big easy list to import from. So as you get more experience with using this pack, you'll just pull from this folder instead. Now, to get started, first create a new document inside of Clip Studio Paint. Then go to File, Import, 3D Data. Then you'll want to navigate to the Ultimate 3D Models Pack folder that we unzipped. Now we can see the 3D Assets and the FBX folder. In this case, let's go to 3D Assets. And let's pick something like Bicycle. You'll see that the Bicycle FBX appears because that's what it's looking for. And we'll go to Open. Immediately what happens is Clip Studio Paint creates a layer with the 3D object inside, indicated by this little icon on the thumbnail. To manipulate the object on the canvas, select the Operation tool, and then you should be able to just click and drag anywhere on the canvas. You'll notice a series of icons on the top and bottom of the screen. Let's focus on the icons at the top for now. You'll notice the first three have a little camera icon and some arrows. If we select this third one, it allows us to zoom in and out of the object. So in this case, the bicycle was a little bit close and I just want to zoom out a bit. The first one allows us to orbit around the object. And the second one allows us to pan. So if I wanted to center the bicycle in this case, I would pan over, maybe click on tumble, and then zoom in just a touch. The next 5 icons all have to do with moving the object in space. So if we click on this very last one, this allows us to move the object around in depth. We're also given this little gizmo control that allows us to rotate along all the different axes. And all these buttons up here do is allow us to control one axis at a time. To move the bike up and down, select the 4th icon, and that allows you to move the bicycle up and down in space. It's important to know the difference between the camera functions and moving the object itself. In most cases, you'll want to just use the camera. It's also important to know that once you have one of these functions selected, you won't affect the others. And you can click and drag anywhere on the canvas for it to take effect. So in this case, I have the translate icon selected, and now I can just click anywhere on the canvas and it'll affect only that property. Conversely, if I were to select the camera rotate and I click anywhere on the canvas, it'll just move the camera around. Let's take a look at some of the extra options. Inside the tool properties, and this is for the operation tool that we're using at the moment, you'll see a bunch of additional options. Here you can affect the scale of the bicycle, the position of the bicycle using the slider bars, and the rotation of the bicycle. These are the exact same functions as the ones up here, except these are just a little bit easier to use. And then also, conveniently, There are reset buttons to reset all of the changes that you did to the object. One of the most useful options in the tool properties is the ability to control the light and shadow. So with this little checkbox, apply light source, you can affect if there's any lighting applied to the object. Let's turn that on. And you can also choose if you want the object to cast shadows on the ground or not. And then one of the funnest options is being able to click and drag on the sphere, allowing you to change the angle of the light on the object. This is really useful if you want the lighting on your 3D object to match what you have in your scene. Below this is another option called outline width, and this allows you to affect how thick the outline of the object is. The default value is 10, but for some objects that might actually be too thick. In general, I would recommend a setting of about 4. Once you're happy with how everything looks, you can then duplicate the layer and then rasterize it. I'm just going to hide the 3D object layer for a second. And what that means is that we have a baked out version of the particular angle and lighting conditions that we had for our bicycle. So if I duplicate this again, you can see that I can now create as many bicycles as I want. But it's important to know that once you rasterize a 3D object, you can no longer affect its 3D properties and it becomes a 2D element. And that's why we duplicated it, so that we still have the 3D object that we can manipulate using the operation tool. Now that's using the 3D assets at their most basic level. Now it's time to do something a little bit cooler. Thank you, bicycle, we're done with you now. Let's start a new document. And let's import another 3D object. Again, going to import 3D data. And this time let's get the living room small table. And I'm going to use these camera controls to zoom out and just position it and get a better angle. Now, the feature I want to talk about now helps you to integrate these 3D models with your 2D work. So if you're doing line drawing or painting, this process is going to help you integrate that so that it sits better with it on your image. And that feature is LT conversion, which comes with Clip Studio Paint X. So with your 3D layer selected, go to Layer, LT conversion of layer, and you're going to get this pop-up with a bunch of settings. Click on Preview so that we can see what these settings do to the final look. And you can see, if I flick this on and off, it goes from being that kind of computer-generated smooth shading to a more graphic look. And now we're going to talk about all these settings here. For starters, let's turn off tone work and just focus on the lines. At the very top, we can choose whether we want it to be a raster layer or a vector layer. In this case, I'm just going to use raster. We can affect the line width, so if I make it really thick, but that's probably too much. Let's drop that back down to 1. And now you can see we get this really clean, beautiful line work. The next setting is accuracy of detection, and this allows us to get more or less detail based on the geometry of the object. So I'll just show you an example. If we lower this down to nothing, it looks like that. And the more we look, and the more we bump it up, it's going to try looking for as many edges as possible within the geometry. Sometimes this does create undesirable artifacts, so be careful with using this slider. More isn't always better in this case. Try to find a happy medium where the line work looks clean and it looks convincingly like a 2D line work. Next, we have the option to adjust the precision to the scene dimension. And this doesn't really affect your work too much. Just try playing with it on or off and decide if you prefer how it looks. In general, this is a scaling thing, and unless you're working with multiple objects, it doesn't really affect anything too much. And then lastly, we have the enhancement degree of the outer line. So let's turn that down. You can see the outline is kind of thinner, and as we bump this up, the outline becomes strengthened. It's like adding a second pass to the outline of the object. So it's up to you what you want to use. We'll talk about depth in another example after. The next thing I want to talk about is tone work. So let's turn on the tone work. And here we can specify how many values we want in our final LT conversion. And what LT conversion is ultimately going to do is create halftone pattern. So it's great for comics or manga. For now, make sure that posterization is turned on. To adjust the values, you can move along the slider so we can go from dark to light. And you can also remove steps of value by clicking and dragging on these little arrows. So I'm going to simplify this. So right now, we have a very contrasty image and we have black and white. If you wanted to add another value step, simply click in between or anywhere along that line, and it'll automatically add a half step. So in between the 93 and 60, if I click, it'll create another in-between value. And this way you can create exactly the kind of value ranges that you want to work with. So again, click anywhere on the slider to add a value, and click and drag these arrows off to remove the values. Below the value slider, you have the options to affect the halftone pattern itself. So you can make each dot made out of circles or hearts or different shapes, anything that you see here. But you don't need to worry about this setting yet because we can always play with these settings later. The line settings and the tone work settings are what are most important here. Let's hit OK and see what happens. You can see that our 3D object has been converted into a more 2D aesthetic. If we open up the layers panel, we can see that a folder with a whole bunch of layers inside was created. Let me minimize this just to show you. So first we have our 3D object, and after we LT converted, we got a folder with a whole bunch of layers inside. I'm going to hide the 3D object for now and maximize the folder. Let's take a look at all the pieces that the LT convert created. So I'm going to hide everything and go through layer by layer. The first layer is the line work. So this is probably the most important layer. What it did was it converted the 3D object's edges into 2D line work. Below that, we have the darkest value of the halftone pattern. And what it's doing is that we really just have a fill layer of the halftone pattern, and then it's masked out into these specific areas. As we move down the list, you can see how all the values that we added to that slider bar when we LT converted were separated into their own layers. This gives us the ability to have a ton of control. And then the final layer of the LT convert is the fill layer. And right now we can't see it because the fill layer is white and the background is white. If I change this fill layer to be a color, you'll see how the fill layer is just a complete silhouette of the 3D object. And this is really useful to use as a mask and as a base for painting. So when we put everything back together, it looks something like that. So let's run through this a few more times for practice. I'm going to delete this layer and go back to our initial 3D setup. And let's say we want to change the angle of this table. We're going to go to Layer, LT Conversion of Layer, hit Preview so that we can see all what our settings do. This time I'm going to turn off tone work and just have the line work. I'm going to hit OK. And it's going to create a folder, in this case, of just the line work and then the fill layer. I'm going to leave that just like that. And we're going to go back to the 3D layer, use the operation tool to move it in space, and position it somewhere in the background. Then we're going to go to Layer, LT Conversion of Layer again. And I know the settings are going to be correct because we did it before. Now in this case, you can see that the preview is showing these line work as being quite a bit darker than the foreground object, which isn't exactly what I want. As objects go off into the distance, they should actually probably get less prominent and make the foreground objects more prominent. This is where the option of depth comes in. So if I turn on the option of depth, we get this graph, this curve. And what this allows us to do is it allows us to control the thickness of the line work based on how far away it is from the camera. So over here is the front and over here is the back. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell it that as the object gets further back in space, the line work is actually going to get thinner to the point where it actually starts to disappear. So let's try and make this look good. So let's turn this down a little bit. I'm going to make it more of a linear path. And, you know, as objects recede into the distance, the line work becomes less prominent. And this is just a creative choice. It's totally up to you how you do it. This is also a case where I'd want to just double check what the results from adjust precision of the scene dimension will do. In this case, it didn't affect anything. So this depth curve was only being applied to the outer line. In this case, I want it to apply to the whole object, so I'm going to turn this off. And then I might actually want to readjust my curves to get a more desired look. Let's hit OK. And let's bring up our 3D object one more time, position it in space. Maybe we should rotate it for some variety. Or we could even have the table flipped over. But let's make it a little bit more civilized. Actually, maybe we'll bring it right up front. Layer, LT Conversion of Layer, Preview. I'm going to turn off the depth this time. Turn up the accuracy detection. And hit OK. And as you can see, the layering isn't quite right because this foreground table is behind this background table, which doesn't make any sense. So I'm going to pull this folder to the top so that it's the foreground element. And just like that, you can create a 2D scene with a lot of ornate tables, something that would take a lot longer to do by hand. Now I want to show you what it's like to work with multiple 3D objects. So let's hide all these LT Convert folders and bring back our 3D object into the center of the frame. Let's say I wanted to add a chair or another table to this scene. So let's go to File, Import 3D Data. And in this case, I'm going to bring out the big table. So import the big table. And remember, we might have scaled up the little table. So let's just make sure that the scale looks a little bit more believable. I'm going to position this table back in space and then increase the object scale by using this slider here. And something that's important to note is that notice how the 3D objects, they're both existing in the same space. When I tumble the camera around, it moves around both of the objects in this scene. And that's because under the tool properties, we can see that there's a list of objects on this layer. We have the small table and the big table. Again, that's just right here. There's a bar at the top of the tool properties. And the reason that they're both existing in the same world space is because we imported the second 3D object directly onto the first. If, for example, I were to select a different layer, go to File, Import 3D Data, and let's grab something else completely different. Let's grab a chair. And I import that. You'll notice that this object, this 3D object, because it was on a different layer when we imported it, is obeying a different 3D perspective. Now that might seem a little confusing, but basically the rule of thumb is if you want your 3D objects to exist in the same 3D world space the same way that these two tables do, make sure that you import the next 3D object into the same 3D layer, not a different 3D layer, okay? So let's just show you an example. So this 3D space is different than the 3D space of these two tables here. And that's because they're on two different layers. So I could just delete this chair layer. And let's say I did want that chair to exist in the same 3D space as these two tables. I would make sure that I have my 3D layer selected, go to File, Import 3D Data, and let's bring that chair in again. And now you can see, if I tumble around the camera, that 3D object is now grounded in the same space as those other objects. And this is how you can start creating a scene. So let's say I want another chair. Import 3D Data. And let's position this chair, let's say at the head of the table. I'm just going to click on this icon to rotate it and position it in space. Now, with all these objects in the scene, I'm going to go to Layer, LT Conversion of Layer, hit Preview, and reduce the accuracy of detection. And just like that, you've converted your 3D objects into convincing 2D line work. Now, you've probably noticed that we have to go to Layer, LT Conversion of Layer a lot. What if there was a way to speed up that process? I'm going to show you a little trick that I do to really make this easy. We're going to create some auto actions to automate the process. And if you don't see this window, you can find it at Window, Auto Action, and make sure that's checked on. We're going to hit Add New Auto Action, and we're going to hit Record. But we got to be careful because anything that we do now is going to be retained in this script. So I'm going to hit Record, and with my 3D layer selected, I'm going to go to Layer, LT Conversion of Layer one more time. And I'm going to do just line work for now. And I'm going to hit OK. And then I'm going to hit Stop because that's all I wanted it to do. Now, and I'm just going to simplify this scene because I just want to work with one object at a time. I'm just going to hide everything except for the small table. Move this around. And now, the cool part, I have this action, which I'm going to rename line work. And when I hit play, it automatically converts the 3D object into line work for me. I no longer have to go up to Layer and LT Convert. And so what that allows me to do is work really quickly. So I'll just move around. I'll rotate this table. Maybe I'll bring it forward a little bit and I'll hit the line work button. Minimize this folder. I'll do it again. I'm going to move this table somewhere else. And then just bring it to the foreground. Let's create a new document and open up a new object just for some variety. And we'll pull the chandelier this time. And if we take a look real quick, you'll see that there's the shadow on the ground. But maybe I don't know exactly how high I want this chandelier to be. And certainly it's not going to be that close to the ground. So I'm going to turn off the shadows. Not the shadows on the object itself, but just the shadows that it casts on the ground. And we do that by hitting the shadow option again. I'm going to run my line work auto action and get some nice line work. And this is just to demonstrate again the power of this script. We can rotate this, run the script again, and it just makes working with the 3D much easier and simpler to use. And so quickly, just like that, we've created really ornate objects using 3D models. And I'm going to create one more auto action. Then I'm going to hit record, layer, LT conversion of layer, hit preview. And instead of just having the line work this time, I actually want to have the tone work. These values look pretty good to me. And when we save this, it's actually going to remember exactly these values. So keep that in mind. Hit OK. It converts the layer for me. And so now, no matter what I do, I can just hit the tone button and instantly get that element completed. So now I have a version that can do the tone and a version that can do the line work. Okay, so having these actions just really helps speed things up when we're working with a scene. So to recap the process for illustration purposes, we import our 3D file. Now we have a nice script. We can just run our script, get some line work. And if you recall, we're going to have a line work layer and a fill layer. And what we want to do is with this fill layer is we want to click this button, lock transparent pixels. And what that is going to allow us to do is paint on this layer without spilling over the edge. And actually, I just need to convert the color expression to color. And now you can begin painting. So like, let's say we had this fire hydrant. I'm just going to digital paint it like normal. Now keep in mind that the fill layer is actually going to include the shadow. So if you don't want this shadow, you'll have to erase it or disable the shadows before you convert. And then you can just start digital painting as you normally would. The very last thing I just want to mention is how to register materials. And all this does is that once you've imported the 3D asset, if you want to use this again in any of your other projects, it makes it really easy. So all you have to do is pop open the material browser. You can also get to it by going to Window, Material. And we're going to register this kitchen oven. So in the material browser, I'm just going to hit create a material folder. And I'm going to call this Ultimate 3D Model Pack. And let me just pull this into its own category. And I can just click and drag the kitchen stove 3D asset into this folder. And now it's going to save that. So if I close this project, don't save, and I create a new project, I can always go back to this and drag it in, and instantly my 3D model is usable there again. So it skips the whole file import process and just has it ready to go inside this library. Okay guys? And with that, I'm going to wrap this introductory video. Thank you very much for watching us. I hope that you found this useful, and I really hope that you'll enjoy playing around with the Ultimate 3D Models Pack for Clip Studio Paint presented by Graphicsly. My name is Jeremy Canton, and I'll see you around.